Good morning. So what is this series exactly? Well, after my dozen or so times of playing through the Pirate101 story, I realized I haven't really ever read the dialogue. Sure, I know major plot points, but I was never enriched by all the dialogue and story this game has to offer. So that is what we're doing today, and for the next few months. I started a new privateer with the explicit purpose to read all the dialogue of the main story and truly learn why it is what we do. Sit back, relax, as we head into the story of Pirate101, experiencing the nuances you may have overlooked, and endure potential side rants about the relevance to today's world. If you like this format, please consider subscribing, commenting, and liking to show me you're enthralled by the Pirate101 story like I've been. Without further ado, let's sit by the fire and get started. Good morning, and welcome back to the I Started a Privateer to read all the dialogue in Part 1 series. Today we're looking at Book 13, which is the entirety of Marleybone. I don't know why they did it like this, but after Mushu, they just made every world just one book. So, Book 13, Book 14, Book 15 covered the entire world. So, we'll be covering the entirety of Marleybone. So we start off Book 13 by speaking to Captain Avery as Book 12 ended, and he tells us that he sent some crew to find Catbeard, but they came back with nothing. And of course, they didn't look inside the monster cave that we talked to Catbeard in Port Regal. So he tells us to, go do it ourselves, and we go to that cave, and we find that he's not there. And we speak to Mr. Norrington, who is like Catbeard's second-hand mate. And he tells us that Catbeard was took prisoner by the Marleybonian dogs, and we need to go free him in Marleybone. Now, in order to get to Marleybone, we need a yellow windstone, which is something we don't have. But he tells us that there is one in Fort Bassett, and he tells us to speak to Gilbert and Sullivan on how to break into the fort. Gilbert and Sullivan tell us about Mr. Lytton, who's a master locksmith, and Lytton tells us that he'll help us if we convince Father Mackenzie, who is like the minister, the priest on Port Regal, to wed Lytton and his fiancée. And then Father Mackenzie tells us that he'll do it if we rid the Church of Ghosts. So, rid the Church of Ghosts so that Father Mackenzie can wed Lytton and his fiancée, who can help us break into Fort Bassett so that we can get the Windstone to go to Marleybone to save Catbeard. So we go into the fort. We fight through a lot of redcoats and soldiers. We blow up the vault, steal it, and run. We return to Gilbert and Sullivan, who tell us that we would need travel papers to get into Marleybone, and suggest that we head to the Marleybone Embassy in Mushu. They also tell us that once we land in Marleybone, we need to find Ned Land in the Admiral Benbow Tavern. So the Marleybone ambassador tells us that it's a hard no for the travel papers unless we get the Yakuza to agree to help the embassy provide tea to ships. So we speak to our contact at the Yakuza, Egg Foo Young, and he tells us that he will do the treaty, except for there's one issue with another member of the Yakuza, Sato, who would essentially wrestle the leadership if Egg Foo Young were to agree to these foreign relations with Marleybone. So we need to silence Sato, which means kill him. So we return to Egg Foo Young, who gives us the tea, and then we return the tea to the ambassador, who then gives us the travel papers. And so we finally land in Marleybone in Westminster Skyway and find Ned Land. Ned informs us that Catbeard is in the glass prison, and they're only allowing him to speak to his lawyer Swidget, so we have to seek out Swidget. Swidget says if we can get his nephew on the right path, because he's kind of becoming a scoundrel and a pirate himself, then he'll get us in touch with Catbeard in the prison. This introduces us to our first gang of Marleybone with the Red Foxes. We beat up a lot of them, kind of like that. And we return Nigel Swidget to his father, and we get permission from Mr. Swidget to speak to Catbeard. Swidget tells us Catbeard's accusations from the Marleybone government, and it is the following. High treason and over 500 counts of smuggling. And as we see later, that's only a few of the accusations that are being thrown at Catbeard. But it gives us an idea that Catbeard is under strict watch from the Marleybone government. So Swidget sneaks us in, and we go to speak to Catbeard. who promises he'll give us his map piece if we let him out. And then this is where Swidget kind of comes up with his plan, and he tells us that right now there is an emergency decree for the Marleybonians as they're at war with the Armada, a war that we started. And so any able captain is able to fight for the Marleybonian military. So if us, as the pirate, can become an able captain for the Marleybone military, we can then take in Capbeard as one of our crew. So we go to the Admiralty foyer and find this Captain Otter guy outside, and he tells us that before we're even considered as a captain or to get an audience with the rest of them, we need to sink an Armada fortress. We do that real quick and we come back to him and we get an audience with the rest of the admirals. After talking to the admirals, they tell us that they need us, and we have our first task is to destroy Beachhead, which is a huge Armada fortress with a bunch of spokes and landings and weapon power and everything like that. We need to destroy it. And the admirals direct us to Engineer Conrad, who will help us in our sabotage of Beachhead. And this is where we recruit Gracie Conrad, who's an incredible companion all around, but for privateers, even more incredible. She gets a little mine. Later on, she gets a golem. She gets Hold and Witch Hunter, which is nice. Also Bladestorm for her guaranteed epic strike. But yeah. We meet her, we recruit her obviously, and then we collect some pure Gelganite, which is like off to the side on the dock, to assist in our sabotage of the Dreadnought Beachhead. So Beachhead is a multi-part dungeon. There's like 4 different spokes and then like the main battery. They're all pretty routine, like they do the same thing every time, except for one of the spokes where we see this like this big camera thing where we turn it on and Bishop is there speaking to Kane about his and Rook's progress in the Marleybone Armada War. And while we're listening, the real Bishop ambushes us with his troops. And then we fight him off, he runs away, and then once we do the third spoke, he again ambushes us, we fight him, and then he runs off again. After defeating all the spokes and sabotaging them, we head to the main battery to finish our assault, setting up various explosives, and then we get ambushed by Bishop again. Fight him, he runs away again. Engineer Conrad tells us that everything is too fortified at the main battery, so we need to head deeper into engineering and flip a bunch of switches to build pressure in this like main cavity and then blow it up. And while we're doing this, we get again ambushed by Bishop, but this is the last time and he dies. And then we blow up the Dreadnought and escape, and then return to the admirals. We let the admirals know what we saw on Beachhead with Bishop talking to Kane about the plan from Rook. So basically what the Armada's plan is to keep Marleybone's focus on one side of the isle, while Rook and some of his other Armada forces come through Hamamitsu Skyway from the other side, so that Marleybone is forced to wage war on 2 fronts. This is kind of like what happened to like Nazi Germany, where they were fighting on 2 fronts with like Russian forces and like Great Britain and French and Polish forces or whatever. They were fighting on 2 fronts, and ultimately would ultimately lead to like losing a bunch of resources and men, troops, will to live, etc. The admirals tell us to head to the Isle of Fetch and aid the Kurgas with their battle. And this is also where Nelson, one of the admirals, tells us that he'll deal with Rook personally. So we speak to the captain on the Isle of Fetch, and he tells us that the Kurgas have actually mutinied and he lost contact with everyone else. So this guy was like standing on the docks, and he tells us that like he has no information on what's going on the inside. So we go in there, we speak to some of the captains that are there. We learn that the Kurgas kidnapped the brigadier into a nearby hotel, and we ambush that hotel. We free the captain, and then we kind of get an idea of what's going on. So the guy that we freed is named Kazinti Singh, who is actually someone we recruit as a privateer, not until later on. But we speak to this guy, and he tells us that the food is too good. And we're like, wait a minute, that you want food to be worse? And it's like, yes, we want the food to be worse so that the Kurgas get angry and fight the Armadas. And so we go on this huge quest line to make the food worse. It deals with like supply line and manufacturing and stuff like that. It consists of like Marmite, like Marleybonian Vegemite kind of thing, or like Marmite. Basically, so yeah, we just do a big grocery list of things, dealing with supply line, manufacturing, etc., etc. And then we return to Gazinti Singh, who in return frees the brigadier, and we get the plans to capture the North Isle from the Armada. So The Kurgas were planning to invade the North Isle to free it from the Armada, but then it's up to us now. And this is where we meet the Dragoons, the Armada Dragoons, those really big dudes that are kind of like Rook, but it's on a smaller scale. And then we fight them, we beat them up, we stop them from invading the Isle, return to the Kurgas, who will now be able to hold the Isle of Fetch in Marleybone's hands. And then we return to the Admiralty. Colonel Smeagol, who is one of the admirals in the Admiralty foyer, he tells us of Marleybone's new plan, which is to use war machines or robots. And this is also, on this questline is where Gracie Conrad gets this war golem. So these little golem things are what Marleybone is trying to use in this war effort. So obviously Marleybone didn't learn from the Great Polarian War, where Valencia started using Armada troops, and then that, turned on them and it created an authoritarian regime. So with that being said, we speak to Dr. Nation, who complains about the admirals, saying that he doesn't have the resources. So, of course, we have to get them from the radicals in the sewers, and the radicals are like the revolutionaries to the Marleybonian government. So we get some valves, some drums, some cylinders, and then Dr. Nation directs us over to Marcus Fox to double check the work and make sure that everything's all good. And this is where Marcus Fox, he says some really classist and racist shit about Dr. Nation and some other Marleybonian people because they come from Albion while he's from Westminster Skyway. So we get an idea of the racism and classism that's in Marleybone, which we see it in Wizard 101s as well. Wizard 101 Marleybone is crazy with the rich lady quest where you have to defeat the sweepers because she thinks they're gonna do crimes. It's there's a ton of racism in Marleybone. And so, with that being said, Marcus tells us to get some Armada troops armor so we can make dummies for the golems to test their abilities on. Once we build the dummies, the golems then attack us by mistake. So we defeat them. We go back to Marcus, we're like, dude, what the hell? And he tells us that the radicals took his brother, and in order to get his brother back, the radicals forced him to reprogram the golems to attack us. So they're trying to get back at us for stealing a bunch of their resources. And so we go to fight the radicals and learn of their boss's location, and it's revealed that Marcus is actually the boss. Yeah, big whoop. He reveals that he made up his brother because he just wanted to wait to kill us. We fight him, obviously, and return the plans to Dr. Nation. So everything is fine. The golems were actually working, but Marcus Fox was sabotaging it so that he could kill us. Upon returning to the Admiralty, the dogs tell us that Nelson hasn't returned from Rook's flagship, and so we need to go help him or avenge him. And this is where the final dungeon of Marleybone comes in. We raid the Victory, which is, I believe that's Admiral Nelson's ship, and we fight some Armada people, we fight some Dragoons, we fight some more Armada people, and then we fight Rook for the first time. This fight's decently hard because you have to protect Admiral Nelson, so he can't die, but you only have to defeat Rook, which is nice. And then after finishing that battle, we grab Nelson and return to our ship so that we can escape, and then we're attacked by Rook again. And then we beat him for real this time, and he's dead. And then we escape the wreck of the Victory, it blows up, and then we return to the Admiralty. It's here that we earn our commission, finally, after doing literally everything for the Marleybonian War that we started. And finally, we return to Catbeard for sentencing, where we can hopefully save him from immediate death. Mr. Swidget has no defense for Catbeard, but he tells the judge that killing Catbeard would be a huge military mistake, and he's a necessary for the Marleybonian Navy if they want to win this war. And we are an able-bodied captain who can take in Catbeard. And so we recruit Catbeard, and he tells us that the map piece he swore he would give us was actually Captain Gunn's map piece, so we've had it the entire time. But he tells us that he does know of another map piece, which is with Argos, who was the big Cyclops in the back of the photo that we saw a few books ago. And this is also where Catbeard tells us that Gortez won his civil war and has now become king of Monquista. And so Marleybone wraps up a lot of storylines. It wraps up the Armada Marleybone War. It wraps up Catbeard's arc of him becoming a better person for seeing all of his crimes and giving it another chance to live. And then it also wraps up Gortez's civil war, which he won and became king. And that is the ending of Book 13. It's a very loaded book because for some reason they decided to make the entire world one book. I've been talking for a lot, but that is the end of Book 13. I will see you guys in Book 14, with Aquila.